Pokémon, a series full of light, joy, and happiness that, however, has always kept some mystery and darkness. In this video, we'll go together region by region, trying to find out something clear or theorize about the possible truth behind all the enigmas that this world has been leaving over the years. So, let's get started with the mysteries of... Many of you watching this video will have a first contact with the series through the anime, quite an experience at the time, but who would have thought that the greatest mystery of its beginnings would be present from its very first scene? What is Mew? Those are easy words to say, but asking it is almost like asking, what are Pokémon? The Pokédex defines it as the new species Pokémon, so it seems that at least its original idea was to be the origin of everything, the first Pokémon that existed, a being that contains the genome, the true essence of the pocket monsters. Because that label of new species seemed to imply that the original idea of Pokemon was to be a branch of the animal kingdom discovered not so long ago, a branch that, for some reason, developed magical powers, being Mew the first of that new species. The coexistence in the first seasons of Pokemon with other animal species would reinforce this theory, of course. The later stories of the creation of the world would contradict or rewrite this vision, establishing that Pokemon existed long before the human being, the world, and the universe itself, being in fact behind its creation. Could it be the first species discovered by the human being? Or one created by Arceus specifically to populate our world? Being all the current wildlife successors of Mew, specializing along the generations to different environments, along with many legendary or extraterrestrial Pokemon that would have no relation with this one. But how could we talk about Mew and the mysteries of the first generation without at least mentioning the mythical truck in the port of Vermilion City? It's really funny how even if there was actually nothing there, as if it was fate, most of the rumors surrounding it would end up pointing to Mew. Unfortunately, all the tricks and glitches that supposedly unlocked something unexpected in it would end up not being true this time, but that doesn't mean it's no longer a very enigmatic place. Assuming it was pure decoration, what's the point of decorating with a unique graphic that's not used anywhere else in the game, with what it involves to design and insert it precisely the only place inaccessible under normal conditions in the region as an Easter egg? This graphic element was kept in the 2 remakes that the game had. You can even find the lava cookie in its surroundings, a local specialty of Hoenn. The same Hoenn where we arrived in the truck, and during gold and silver events, there is no trace of the mysterious vehicle in the port. Is there any connection in all this? But besides the truck, the SSN itself generates its own questions. Once the HM cut is obtained from the captain, we are told that the steamship set sail for its destination and will not return for another year. But it never returns. Obviously, this has an easy technical explanation. The first gen games didn't have an internal clock that could measure that amount of time as it would be possible in the future. But then, why didn't they simply say that the ship will return without specifying the time? How is it possible that in the post-game of the second generation, which, if anything, was careful to recreate Kanto as nostalgic as possible, one of the most characteristic elements of this was replaced, for no apparent reason, by the SS Aqua. It almost seems as if the game wanted us to wonder if something has happened to the cruise, preventing its promise to return a year later from being fulfilled, and turning its melancholic tune into something bittersweet. Lavender Town is another classic of the series when talking about mysterious events, but beyond its myths, there is one big question that remains unanswered. In Gold and Silver, we see how the old Pokémon Tower was demolished, and in its place, the Kanto radio tower was built, supposedly moving the tombstones to a humble graveyard in charge of Mr. Fuji. They tell you how there are secret chambers in the graveyard that only Mr. Fuji can access, but no matter how hard we look, we can't find any more clues of something like that. It's interesting and quite mysterious, but I would try to find a possible answer. The original Lavender Town was planned to convey a tense and suffocating atmosphere, while in the second generation, on the other hand, the souls rest in peace, and what were fear and tension become peace, melancholy, and a hint of hope. The secret chambers in the graveyard, to which only Fuji has access, probably have an explanation as simple as that. Obviously, the tombstones of a colossal tower are not going to fit stuffed in a small and humble chapel, so there are probably subway chambers, to which access is more restricted to prevent incidents similar to those of the past from happening again. Even more mysterious are the upper floors of the same radio tower, restricted in a much more inexplicable and forced way. This probably responds to the same reason as many limited locations in Kanto do: the lack of space in the cartridges, as it was already a technical feat in the first place to include the Kanto region, would have to remain half-finished. Who knows if it was originally planned that something interesting would happen there? The Sprout Tower is one of the most nostalgic and intriguing places in the Pokemon world. Of the 3 great towers of Johto, it's the most forgotten, but definitely also the most curious in terms of its structure. It's built around a giant flexible pillar that moves back and forth, and it's said that even if a terrible earthquake were to hit it, it would still be in place. It's no big mystery that this would be inspired by the anti-seismic structures of the buildings of Japan, especially temples. There's no record that these great pagodas have succumbed to the force unleashed by Mother Earth, making these sacred towers the greatest symbol of resilience in Japan. Now, the mystery comes if we go to its legend, because it's said that it was built from a giant bell sprout. Most likely it's nothing more than that, a popular legend of Violet City starring its traditional Pokemon Bellsprout. But seeing that giant Pokemon would end up becoming real in numerous ways, there's a small chance that this story was real. In the beta edition of the original games, we can see how the Sprout Tower was going to be much more massive. We can even find a secret evolution of the Bellsprout line that went beyond the limit of 2 evolutions, almost emulating the rumored Pokegods of the time. Are all these events somehow connected? Without leaving Violet City, using glitches to walk through the map, we can access a secret house that cannot be accessed in a normal way. The house doesn't have any door event programmed, so we have no way of knowing what it was about and what the hell it's doing there. But leaving map leftovers in this way is something unprecedented in the series, so it's inevitable that it arouses our curiosity. There are 2 signs in the area that are not programmed to be read, but hint that it was not another normal house in the city. Some people theorize that it's actually some kind of alternative map discarded from the ruins of Alph, and unknown are probably the biggest mystery of this series. Beyond their singularity as Pokemon and their seemingly key role in the very creation of the Pokemon world, the games have been surprisingly cryptic about them. Information about them is scarce. We don't even know where they come from beyond the locations in different regions, with what seems to be a nexus to their dimension. It feels as if they exist somewhere between reality and meaning itself. And to me, the fact that you can only get shiny unknowns in their I and V forms, because in these editions, for how the 2nd generation is programmed, shiny were determined by IVs, is pure poetry, and the biggest clue we have to how these Pokemon are there to teach us, in this case, cartridge programming. But what exactly is their role? Why do they appear in the ruins of Alph? What are the ruins of Alph in the first place? Who built them in honor of the unknown? Now, if we continue forcing through the walls of the game and walking beyond its limits, we may reach the horrific Glitch City, a junk map full of unused graphics already present in the 1st generation, but that in this 2nd, despite not being so well known, would return with a particularity that the previous Glitch City doesn't share with it. Among the ruins and graveyards of pixels, the sprite of a girl can sometimes appear, standing by, looking around, showing her fear and despair. This young girl, with a black and white palette to make everything even more disturbing, was named by the Pokemon community as the Ghost of Glitch City. Unexpectedly, for this type of glitched encounters, which are usually merely testimonial and don't allow any interaction, the girl usually walks up to the player, says a series of broken and unreadable dialogue, and starts a battle that crashes the game. However, using glitches, it's possible to give her a valid trainer class to start a battle against her. A trainer named Kara, with an unexpectedly logical team in terms of structure. Defeating her triggers the appearance of a strange blood-red Seadra, along with a series of meaningless victory fanfares before the game crashes. But losing is even scarier, causing us to return home with a broken map, receive a call with bugged text, and then the game just crashes. What are all the creepypastas that infested the internet next to this event that technically could in fact happen on a real cartridge? Imagine as a kid finding this. Pokémon would become something pretty traumatic for you, as everything that has to do with this story ends up being so traumatic that it seems impossible that these are unused assets connected by chance. But it seems that after all, there is one more thread to pull on this mystery. When the girl approaches the player, the song that sounds is none other than the one from the Burned Tower, a place where a few of you will remember an NPC with a unique peculiarity in the entire series, a fire breather that loses its color in its sprite, as if it were smeared with ashes, or even worse, completely burned. Exactly like the sprite of the protagonist of this macabre story, who could have been conceived to originally appear in the Burned Tower as well, as a ghost of the tragic incident hundreds of years ago, but for being too obscure, she would be discarded from the original story and sent to this graveyard of unused assets, waiting for a fearless trainer who overcomes all limits imposed by the game to appear in that forbidden place, to offer her a last battle and lets her finally rest in peace. Why was Chris replaced? This is the only instance in the series that a main character has been replaced by another instead of just getting a redesign. It's a really sad story, since beyond the affection that many of us may have for this character, her great relevance as the first female playable character, and therefore one of the most iconic, makes this condemnation to oblivion doubly sad. Probably the answer has to do with the fact that the remakes are gold and silver, being Chris a character introduced in Crystal that didn't exist in these, but that doesn't justify at all not bringing her back, especially when the remakes are really a hybrid of gold, silver, and crystal. In the hidden data of Heart Gold and Soul Silver, there are even unused icons of her, so it seems that she was going to be here but was replaced for some strange reason at the last minute. Could it be that there is still hope to meet her again someday? In the remakes of the third generation, after traveling across Hoenn's vast ocean, we can find Sea Mauville, an old power plant that was supposed to supply Mauville City in an apocalyptic scenario that someone apparently predicted, and one of the darkest places in the series, with some of the most horrid details regarding the project. Of course, the place alone is already a mystery, but perhaps the original one in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald was even more mysterious, in a different timeline in which this sinister project never existed. Originally, the site was occupied by the abandoned ship, a luxury passenger ship once known as SS Cactus. It's unknown what happened to the passengers and crew, but the abandoned remains in the middle of the sea are proof of a disaster that would eventually be forgotten and turned into a natural preserve and tourist attraction in the region, visited mainly by families, children, and couples. Or so it seems at first glance. If we investigate it carefully, we can find some treasures, but perhaps the most interesting one is the scanner, which we can give to Captain Stern in exchange for one of Clamperl's evolution items, one that gathers the strength of the sea. The presence of this object, hidden in the most submerged and inaccessible part of the ruins, and the fact that Captain Stern's team is looking for it insistently, suggests that this place was not originally a simple passenger ship either, and that some kind of research where the machinery would originally be used was taking place there. In this timeline, there is no reference to this place as a power plant, or to the terrible experiments extracting life energy from Pokémons like in the remakes. Being Captain Stern one of the greatest oceanographers of the Pokémon world, maybe he was in charge of that project, one much brighter than the one seen in the remakes, being conducted in the SS Cactus, a secret investigation of the mysteries of the seabed. But the most mysterious thing about the place is what happened on the ship to cause its wreck, an event to which we don't find any reference, but being that it seems obvious obviously inspired by the events of the Titanic, especially by the fact of being surrounded by so many myths and mysteries even today, it's interesting that in the storage hold you can get Ice Beam. Could it be a clue or a reference to the cause of the real tragedy? Someone who also doesn't like ice is Drake, leader of the Elite Four of this generation, and I've always associated him with this place. Think about it, a ship captain with ragged clothes and a generally rather haggard look in the same generation that a shipwreck is introduced. As if that were not enough, he specializes in a type weak to ice. Perhaps this connection is more real than we think, as this character's description on the Pokénav reads that he's dedicated to the Pokémon that saved his life. Some of Dragonite's entries in the Pokédex talk about how some of them are so kind-hearted that they constantly fly over the immense seas and rescue drowning people. There's also Kingdra, which Drake has in his team. According to its entries, it creates huge whirlpools that can swallow even ships. Perhaps it was able to catch him in an attempt to stop it, even though it was too late, because the SS Cactus was doomed at that point. The melancholy with which he speaks of the sea, and the unstoppable force of nature represented in the dragon type. Could it be that Drake survived that unfortunate episode thanks to one of these dragons, and decided to become a dragon taming specialist to show his gratitude to the type who saved his life? The ocean of Hoenn hides so many mysteries, and when it seemed that we were still far from catching sight of solid ground, 1 in 30,000 had the chance to set foot on the promised land, Mirage Island. The technical details of what causes it to appear in a small percentage of games have long since been decoded, yet its true nature remains an enigma. What is the point of such a huge place appearing out of nowhere and disappearing the next day? I think it's quite clear what this place represents. Crossing the famous ocean of Hoenn, known worldwide for its inclemency, for someone who is not prepared, could be fatal. You are exhausted, on the verge of fainting, but suddenly this place appears. An island paradise that doesn't appear on the maps, with delicacies such as Lychee Berry and dreamy Pokémon totally out of place, with no direct damage moves, therefore harmless. The place would come to represent an illusion caused by fatigue, dehydration, and starvation, a mirage that reflects our last desires for survival. It seems that they wanted to send a message with these locations of how massive and inclement nature can be, to highlight a map with a brutal balance between water and land that the legendaries symbolize, as well as Team Aqua and Magma, which, despite not being very subtle, also hide a big secret that is rarely a topic of discussion. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, a grunt reveals that in the past, Archie and Maxie used to be in the same team. Which team was he referring to? It might sound more reasonable in the original games, where the two had virtually identical characters and ways of acting, but in the remakes, they are much more the opposite in every way. It's hard to believe that they shared a common origin and worked side by side in the past. Does this mean that both teams were one at some point? Perhaps one dedicated to studying and preserving the region's ecosystems, but that would end up clashing in radically opposite conclusions? Of all the mysteries that the encounter between land and sea in this region brings to us, only the biggest and most unknowable of all remains: the Regis. Their own hunting is a mystery itself in these games. An extremely ancient civilization sealed them, placing multiple riddles and tests so that only someone with courage and hope could reach them and open the key to awaken the, as they called it, eternal Pokémon. They really possessed a very deep and unexpected knowledge for such an ancient civilization. Just look at how the keys to the chamber are Relicanth and Wailord, two Pokémon that to an untrained eye may seem random and common, but they explain everything that Hoenn represents. Relicanth is an immutable life form from the prehistoric era, from even before the Regis, that has remained unchanged to this day, a Pokémon that was part of that primordial era immediately after Kyogre and Groudon shaped the world. Wailord, on the other hand, are a modern and recent addition to the evolutionary chain, and and the current world ecosystem. But these Pokémon also represent the overall theme of these games, the connection and balance between land and sea. The coelacanth that inspires Relicanth is closely related to the ancestors of species that would come out of the sea and evolve into land animals. Wailord, on the other hand, is a whale, a species whose ancestors inhabited land but evolved to live in the sea. They could even be an analogy for how this game explores both the surface and the seabed. The heavy Relicanth would drag the character to the bottom of the ocean, while Wailord, being extremely light for its colossal dimensions, supposedly less dense than air, could be used to return to the surface. The civilization that chose these two symbols for its tests demonstrated a very advanced knowledge for its time. So, what is the White Rock? Unique in the world, and around which thousands of rumors were spread in its day, it could have remained there as a simple ornament, an aesthetic element, but in the following generation, there was another White Rock, at the end of Route 224, which was the key to a secret Pokemon event as it was rumored with the original in Moss Deep. I feel that here, once again, they wanted to refer to the rumors and excitement of discovering new things in the cartridge, the thirst for discovery, thanks to which the Pokemon series managed to explode at the time and become what it is today. That's why, in the following White Rock, next to Professor Oak, the game expresses gratitude with a beautiful path of flowers that opens before us, thanking us for everything. A bridge to the greatest mysteries. The fourth generation is in fact one of the most mysterious generations, starting with the disturbing tale of an unexpected interlocutor. In the beginning, there was only a churning turmoil of chaos. At the heart of chaos, where all things became one, appeared an egg. Having tumbled from the vortex, the egg gave rise to the original one. From itself, two beings the original one did make. Time started to spin, space began to expand. From itself again, three living things the original one did make. The two beings wished, and from them, matter came to be. The three living things wished, and from them, spirit came to be. The world created, the original one took to unyielding sleep. This tale refers, of course, to Arceus, the alpha Pokemon that even after multiple versions of these games, even after visiting a past much more in touch with these legends in a title dedicated to its entity, is still as obscure as the first day that its event was included in the 4th generation games but was completely inaccessible, that the capture of the supposedly unobtainable Pokemon triggers such specific events. What was the point of including this dude's dialogues if it was not supposed to be unlockable? With the fact that neither Legends Arceus directly confronted the question of the true nature of the alpha Pokemon, it seems that all references to this Pokemon are intentionally confusing, chaotic, and contradictory, increasing that feeling of being on the trail of something that escapes our understanding. But back to the beginning. Who is he? This hiker, who gives us details about the roots of the universe and its creation, whose knowledge seems to eclipse that of any other character, and to top it off, that would never make an appearance in the course of a normal game, appearing only at the remote event of having in our team an uncatchable Pokemon. Leaving aside some crazy theories for now, this is, for me, one of the most enigmatic events of the series, even more for the fact that it was so hidden that it wasn't revealed until a decade after the games were released. But if we also transfer this legitimate Arceus to the Johto remakes, we are transported to the Sinnoh ruins, in a sacred place apparently also related to the creation of the universe. Besides Cynthia investigating mythology, as is usual for her, we can find a hiker of the same characteristics. But that's right, the mysterious Azure Flute to access the Hall of Origin and trigger all this series of events was never distributed in the original editions, although the Azure Flute was not the only object present in the game code, but totally unobtainable. As in all generations, Gen 4th has several beta items of these characteristics, like one called Loot Sack, with a description that says that it's used to carry loot obtained in the coal mine. There is no feature like that in the games, but there are 2 coal mines in the Sinnoh region. Could it be that originally some kind of minigame in those mines was going to be where you could get the fossils and other treasures? Now, the real mystery of this generation's beta items is none other than the SS ticket. You can't imagine how my imagination was blown away when I saw that item for the first time as a kid in one of my friends' cheat-infested pirate flash cartridges at the time. For me to see it in their inventory was a sign that this item existed, and therefore it had to be available somehow, saying that it was to take the SS Anne. Unfortunately, none of that would end up being true, but the whole case is a complete mystery, especially since it refers to the SS Anne and not to any other ship in the series. What kind of travel and destination was originally planned for these games so that this object is even present in the code? What about Cyrus? In both editions, there were many questions left in his story that have never been resolved. In Diamond and Pearl, he leaves without further ado with the promise that it's not over and that someday he will return to make his dream come true. We never heard from him again, and Team Galaxy loses a lot of relevance, but at no time is its dissolution announced. Where did he retire to? And what does he plan for his declared return? But in Platinum, everything was left in an even more mysterious and dark point. When he summons Dialga and Palkia, Giratina surprisingly pounces on him to heroically save the universe. Then, together with Cynthia, we enter the rift that Giratina opened in the border between both worlds to prevent it from deforming reality and causing more problems. And after all the events in there, we see that Cyrus decides to stay in the distortion world, which surprisingly fits his vision much better than the outside one. Then we never heard from Cyrus again. Would he really give up his goals? Or would he try to convince Giratina of his ideas to return to the world with it as an ally? Or even try to go deeper into parts of the distortion world looking for who knows what? Dive brought us great moments in the vast third generation, a new world to explore in the depths of the ocean, hiding an unforgettable story, one that opens the door to an eternal Pokémon. But in Unova, to everyone's surprise, this feature came back. From the Bay of Undella Town, we can use Dive and start to explore one of the greatest mysteries in the history of the franchise, the Abyssal Ruins. At first glance, the ruins seem to be just the remains of an ancient civilization, full of priceless treasures and inscriptions in an unknown language. But after 500 steps, we notice that something strange is happening as a powerful torrent of water is released and we are sent back to the water's surface. To make matters worse, the unreadable writing on the walls seems to keep changing, making them even more difficult to interpret. It gives the impression that whoever built the ruins did so to make sure that only the right person could advance through it and reach the end. Everyone believes that these are the remains of a civilization long forgotten under the sea, but doesn't the fact that its defense mechanism is a strong torrent of water that pushes you out indicate that the place was built from the beginning in the depths of the ocean? At that time, when Pokemon and humans didn't used to work together, who would have the technology and tools for something like this? At this point, you could either go for a master's diploma in cryptology and hermeneutics to try to solve the mystery, or just wait 2 years. Because in Black and White 2, after the Pokemon League, we find the wicked Zinzalin, one of the 7 sages, and he gives the player a book with Ghetsis' research about the place. We know the villain was a great scholar of the myths and legends of Unova to execute his plan of taking over the region, and perhaps, in a paradoxical way, it's thanks to his notes that we can easily decode the inscriptions. With that, we find that they are all praises to a king of unknown identity, a brave, kind, and adventurous king who never loses hope and has a dream. That moves his people, that acts with love, that fought hatred. The Pillar of Changing Text was precisely the first test of the ruins. If we take more than 190 steps to reach the pillar, it means that we don't know the way and we are intruders. But if we get there in less steps, the path is opened and we are allowed to continue. The messages also mention how we need to shine and act strong if we agreed. Cryptic hints for us to use flash and strength to continue exploring the place. which may sound familiar to you, as they are indeed very similar to the puzzles we had to solve in Hoenn to access the Regis. By the similarities between the two, it may almost seem that both puzzles are the work of the same civilization. The panels also mention how the king talked to all beings, how he saw the future and saved all from waves, acting with love to represent the ideals of all. At this point, we can already figure out what's going on. But let's talk a bit more about Ghetsis. The design of this gen's main antagonist is full of references and symbols, but beyond that, during the whole game, and even in the anime, Ghetsis only shows one arm. Even in some artworks, he gives the impression of having some sort of paralysis in half of his face. The exception is the game's opening cinematic, where he appears crowning N with both of his arms working, so it's possible that his body may have been damaged in some incident close in time to the events of the game. Could it be that, as the community has theorized, one of his powerful Pokémon attacked him in the awful training his team was subjected to? Did something happen in any of the scrapped plans that the game lets us know Ghetsis had before he met N? Or could it be that he did find the legendary, but it perceived Ghetsis' evil machinations and attacked him, forcing him to escape, injured, to restructure his plans? It would be nice to get to know some details of this character's past and his involvement with the trainers of his generation. Now it's time for the luminous Kalos. Is Mega Evolution a pure and bright phenomenon, as the characters in the game claim, or one gruesome and wicked, as is occasionally implied? There is a lot of debate about this topic in the Pokemon community. Many of the entries in the Pokédex mention the terrible consequences of these transformations on the Pokemon's organism, describing the traumatic nature of the process for them, or directly how their skeletons overdevelop until they break through their skin and connective tissues. Many people think that these entries could be due to the lack of comprehension of this phenomenon in Alola, but that hypothesis has lost weight, now that in Legend ZA, set in a Lumio city far more familiar with Mega Evolution, the sinister and sadistic descriptions of the phenomenon not only remain, but become even more intense. Some argued that it was Game Freak's excuse to remove them from the board, but when you think about it, Game Freak had no problem dropping the rest of the regional gimmick mechanics without any explanation. Why would it be different with Mega Evolution? Some of these descriptions are clearly visible in the Pokemon's design, such as Scizzor's body's melting or Aerodactyl's bones piercing its muscles as spikes. What about the Lumio City Ghost Girl? What are all these spectral apparitions that, with the exception of Sinnoh and Galar, have been left without a clear explanation? Are they just Easter eggs, or at some point will they play an important role in the franchise? But that's not the only odd event in Lumio City. There is an anonymous message behind the station timetable that says, "I'm going to go for help. Wait in the usual place." There was no other news about this, so it was most likely a detail put there just to confuse the player. But something like this, in a city full of light and fun, and so out of context, is even more disturbing. To this day, I still feel a certain uneasiness when I get to that part of the game, knowing that the brightness and joy that characterize it are a facade, and something weird is going on there. Everything about Team Rainbow Rocket is a big mystery. The story says that Giovanni gathers versions of the villains who were successful in their respective universes, but in the Pokemon games, the protagonists are an invincible and inevitable factor. So for that to happen, he must have met those versions in universes where the protagonists don't exist, or where they chose not to intervene in the plans of the villainous teams for some reason. The most notable example would be the case of Red. The rest of the admins talk with no hints of having confronted the protagonists, but Giovanni is the only one who implies that he knew Red, by mentioning that our look and determination reminds him of someone. If Red existed in his universe, what happened for Giovanni to gain control of Mewtwo even with his presence? It's disturbing how, at the end of the episode Rainbow Rocket, Giovanni leaves without losing his cool at any time and by his own means. Could that epilogue have been just the beginning of something something that goes far deeper? The organization has been seen in the island of Pasio in Pokémon Masters, a completely different timeline, and even made an appearance in Pokémon Go. Could it be that he plans to take control of our own world? Jokes aside, Giovanni was able to develop technology to travel between dimensions, among other things, in order to set up this whole scheme. The theme of alternate dimensions and worlds was covered a lot in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, and one of the biggest doubts I had about it was, what is Guzzlord? For me, it's the most interesting and mysterious of the Ultra Beasts. As we travel to their worlds, we get to witness remote possibilities of distant universes, but it's implied that Guzzlord's world was very similar to ours. However, there was a catastrophe in a power plant that somehow led to the collapse of the planet and forced the civilization to flee to other planets. It would be easy to assume that this event on its own was what ended the world, but if you think about it, it's kinda hard to believe that something so isolated would bring the whole world to its doom, especially when people had time to flee. It must have been more like a progressive situation. Guzzlord can be found among the remnants of the city, consuming its ruins, so the game could be giving a hint to the fact that its emergence was the real cause of the cataclysm. This Pokemon would absorb the radiation from the disaster at the nuclear power plant, mutating to obtain the insatiable hunger that defines it, multiplying without control and becoming an invasive species that would literally eat the world. The question is, could it be a mutation of a Pokemon we know? Maybe a Snorlax or some other species with a voracious appetite that would be radically enhanced by this event? Another mystery involving dimensional travels is Annabelle. At first glance, she seems to be merely an adult version of the character we already met in the Battle Frontier in Emerald. But things get weird when we learn that she was found on a beach having lost her memory. Additionally, no one seems to know her, even though she's a character who used to be one of the top trainers of the world, so it would seem natural for her to be a celebrity in Alola. If you add to this that her theme is literally the one from Emerald's Battle Frontier, with the 3rd generation instrument instead of a remix, everything seems to point to the fact that she's actually the Annabelle from Emerald, who came from the Game Boy Advance universe, where there is no Mega Evolutions, to the universe with these from Sun and Moon, where the Battle Frontier never came to exist. So there's probably another Annabelle in that world who never became a Frontier Brain, maybe not even a trainer, showing that the power of the Ultra Wormholes goes beyond all we thought, as they are capable of connecting universes from different technologies. If that's in the cards, why shouldn't it be possible at some point to see Ultra Wormholes connecting spin-offs or the anime? Moving on to Galar, and in the line of antagonists that disappear in mysterious conditions, what happened to Rose? At the climax of the games, we witness how he overestimated his skills, and in the end was unable to control Eternatus and execute his plan to use it to supply the region with infinite energy. This would force Leon to interrupt his battle in the Pokemon League finals to rush in and try to resolve the situation, only to be completely overpowered as well. That's when we face Rose, and from the way events unfold, it seems to be to stop him, as it happens with the final battle of the rest of antagonists in the series. But actually, what the chairman was trying to do there was to check if we were strong enough to correct his mistake and stop that monster. Eternatus ends up revealing to be much more powerful in its true form than even what the most apocalyptic calculations could predict, and only with the help of the heroes of Galar together, reaching a new and more powerful form thanks to their unprecedented resolve, is that they managed to stop and catch it. But after all that commotion, we totally lose track of the president. In the post-game, we learn that his company, Macrocosmos, seems to have been confiscated, and even the imposing Rose Tower was renovated into the new Battle Tower of Galar and handed over to Leon. If we investigate a bit further, we find out that after the events of the Darkest Day, he surrendered to the authorities, apparently being sentenced to community work in the mines of the region. But there we meet Oleana instead, who tells us that she decided to take her boss's punishment. She also mentions that Rose is grateful to the player for saving the region, but that he's still worried about Galar's future. It all seems to leave the door open for us to see a new move on his part at some point, as we've seen Pokemon almost always do with its villains. Could it be that in the future we might see an episode of this series focused on their stories after the events of their respective games? That would be epic. But there's no problem if Game Freak doesn't touch it. That just means more alternate stories to write for me. What is the blue Dynamax? To everyone's surprise, Calyrex appears with a blue glow in the adventure through the Crown Tundra, as opposed to the red glow we had seen earlier in the game. It's not even limited to Dynamax. All the elements that the game hints are powered by that energy, granting strange powers or causing a sudden change in size, have that reddish aura. But every time Calyrex manifests its powers, it releases a blue glow. In the Crown Tundra, we get to hear the story of a wonderful and powerful hero who saved the world, but as a result of the extravagant show of the Dynamax, it was forgotten by the people and left behind under the snow. Perhaps it all goes back to the age-old tale, the clash between good and evil. Dynamax and Gigantamax, as well as the other derivative elements, are represented with red to symbolize how they are powered by the evil energy of Eternatus, a being that steals life wherever it goes, causing pain, death, and despair. This way, the show of the Dynamax and the gyms would actually be stained with blood and suffering. The blue glow in which the King of Bountiful Harvests shines in its final form, on the other hand, represents heroism against this threat. Calyrex is a magical Pokemon that took care and protected nature, and in perfect symbiosis, nature granted it a pure power with which to face evil in that final battle, the original darkest day. But the clash between good and evil has no end. One thing that really puzzles me about this whole story are Zacian and Zamazenta. They cannot Dynamax, but they have ultimate moves created specifically to counter the huge followers of the gigantic Pokemon. So you would think that they are clearly on the right side, as they are not tempted by these powers. But if we stick to colors and what they symbolize, Zacian does in fact emit a blue trail in its behemoth blade, while surprisingly, Zamazenta, with its behemoth bash, releases a red glow. And as we have seen, the game uses that color in elements that are powered by the evil power of the invader. How does that dissonance fit into the story of the games? Well, we know that Zacian and Zamazenta have a strong rivalry, so it's possible this could go back to the fact that the Shield Pokemon was originally on Eternatus' side, as its right hand, Zamazenta, would face its sibling, the hero Zacian, but at the moment of truth, it would choose to fight for the right thing and use its own power against Eternatus? It may sound crazy, but let's remember that this legend is based on the most classic depiction of good versus evil. And what is more typical in these stories than the archetype of the redeemed hero who stands on the side of righteousness at the moment of truth? Eternatus had reached an unprecedented power, so it might not have been possible to defeat it without that betrayal. Also, if we get a little bit creative, the trainer who moves Zamazenta to the point of making it have confidence again is Hop, a character with a story that has quite a few parallels to that. He also spent a good part of his life following a wrong ideal until he decided to take his own path. But if there's a region that made a great job in being mysterious to keep the player asking questions at all times, it's without a doubt Paldea. It all starts with the power of the crystals, which have a never-seen-before ability in the franchise, materializing impossible events and technology straight out of a dream. These crystals come from Terapagos, and for me, the biggest question that was left unanswered in this generation, and from which all other doubts derive, is is, what is the true nature of this creature? The game presents a brutal level of ambiguity in terms of whether its crystals make possible a dreamlike technology, leading to the construction of the time machine and the temporal chaos and paradoxes of these games, or whether, on the contrary, they directly blur the borders between imagination, dreams, and reality, making elements of one dimension merge with others. Its role in the DLCs is very humble, with glimpses of unprecedented power, but ultimately ending in an ordinary battle. However, when we consider how its presence affects the story of the games, it seems safe to say that the Pokémon has some kind of influence on the fabric of reality, or in other words, on the proper fiction and story of the games. If so, we could be looking at the most powerful Pokémon of all, a scriptwriter of history that renders Arceus small at its side. Following this point, in the end, what are Paradox Pokémon? Their multiple contradictions and cliché designs, wildly different from Game Freak's way of creating Pokémon, especially in the last few generations, seem to point to the fact that everything is intentional to make the player suspicious of them. As the characters in the game claim, are they just time travelers? Embodiments of a researcher's dreams of a romantic and idealized past or future? Or are they outright anomalies and disruptions of a reality overwritten by Terapagos for a purpose that escapes our understanding? It's all so unclear that it's hard to even find words to define it, but at least we know that the professor's AI went inside the supposed time machine, right? Although we have no idea if it's really a time machine or if there is even anything on the other side of it. Could it be that this super advanced artificial intelligence came to ask itself all these questions long before anyone else, from the very first moment it was conceived, but even it was not able to come up with a clear answer and decided to face whatever it was on the other side to find the answers it was looking for?